T.O.E.S for true crime. 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 T.O.E.S for true crime.
Why does the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder case seem devoid of rage? Isn't rage a natural response to such a horrendous act? Let's delve into this perplexing conundrum together. In the usually quiet town of Moscow, Idaho, a shocking quadruple murder has rocked the community to its core. Yet the response from key parties involved has been surprisingly muted. Where's the indignation, the outcry, the thirst for justice? The crime itself is chilling. 4 innocent lives brutally taken, a community left in shock and fear. This isn't a storyline ripped from a best-selling thriller, it's a grim reality that residents of this small town are grappling with. Let's introduce the key parties involved. Pastor Doug Wilson of Christ Church, a prominent figure in the Moscow community, and a man whose influence reaches far beyond the pulpit. Then we have the Moscow Police Department, the protectors of peace and the enforcers of justice. And at the center of it all, we have the defendant, Brian Kohberger, a man accused of committing an act so heinous it's hard to comprehend. Each of these parties plays a significant role in the aftermath of the crime. Their reactions, their words, and their actions have the power to shape public sentiment and influence the course of justice. Yet in this case, we've seen a remarkable lack of rage. A lack of the raw, visceral response that such a violent act would typically incite. Why is it that a town so rocked by tragedy seems so eerily calm? Why are the voices that should be loudest seemingly so quiet? And how does this silence impact the pursuit of justice? These are the questions we'll explore as we delve deeper into the silent outrage of the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder case. The answers may not be easy to digest, but they're crucial if we're to understand the dynamics at play in this disturbing case. Let's start by examining Doug Wilson's response, or lack thereof. Doug Wilson, a prominent figure in Moscow, surprisingly silent. Why? This is a question that has been lingering in the air, a question that demands an answer. Doug Wilson, the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, a man who has taken it upon himself to establish the town as a Christian community, governed by Christian laws and principles, remained notably quiet in the wake of the quadruple murders that shook his community to its core. This silence, however, is not just surprising, it's perplexing. As a man of the cloth, one would expect Pastor Wilson to be at the forefront, leading his community through such a trying time. A pastor's role often extends beyond spiritual guidance. They are pillars of their community, looked upon for moral support and guidance, especially in times of crisis. Yet, in the face of such a horrific crime, Wilson remained conspicuously silent. One might argue that this could have been a golden opportunity for Pastor Wilson, a chance to show his community that he cares, that he stands with them in their time of grief. This could have been a moment for him to clear his name, to push aside the shadows of past controversies, and step into the light as a beacon of hope for his community. Remember, this is the same Doug Wilson who has been a part of a growing Christian nationalist movement. A man who has expressed his own unique views on social issues, a man who has been under scrutiny for his beliefs. This situation could have presented a perfect PR stunt for him to demonstrate his empathy, his commitment to his community. But instead, we heard nothing. No condemnation of the crime, no call for justice, no words of comfort for the victims' families. It's as if he chose to distance himself from the incident entirely. This silence, this lack of response, it raises questions. It makes one wonder about the reasons behind this silence and the implications it carries. Moving on, let's examine the reaction of the Moscow Police Department. The Moscow Police Department, as cool as jazz musicians amidst the chaos. Unusual, isn't it? Imagine a smoky jazz club, a quartet of musicians lost in the rhythm, cool and composed, even as the music reaches fever pitch. Now, transpose that image to a police department in the wake of quadruple murders. Odd, right? Yet that's what we observed in Moscow, Idaho. Law enforcement agencies are typically the embodiment of public outrage in situations like these. They're the ones pounding their fists on podiums, promising justice, vowing to leave no stone unturned in their quest to apprehend the perpetrators. They're the ones who personify the community's anger, their sense of urgency, and their demand for answers. But in Moscow, we saw a different tune being played. Rather than the fervor we're accustomed to, the Moscow Police Department handled the press conferences with an uncanny serenity. Their statements were measured, their demeanor calm, almost detached. It was as if they were delivering a weather forecast, not discussing a horrific crime that had shaken the community to its core. This isn't to question their commitment or their professionalism. We're sure they're working tirelessly behind the scenes. But the public face of the investigation, the one that the community looks to for reassurance, was as cool as a saxophone solo on a moonlit night. Could it be a tactic? A way to keep the community from panicking? Or is it a reflection of a department that's seen too much and grown too weary? We can only speculate, but one thing is crystal clear. The usual rage, the typical urgency, was conspicuously absent. It was replaced by a strange, unsettling coolness, a jazz-like improvisation, in a situation that seemed to call for a more traditional tune. Next, we turn our attention to Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger, the defendant, eerily quiet. Wouldn't you plead your innocence? As we delve into our next point of curiosity, we find ourselves face to face with an unnerving silence. This silence does not echo within the confines of a courtroom, nor does it permeate a solemn press conference. Rather, it looms over the character of Bryan Kohberger, the individual at the heart of this tragic tale. A man accused of the most heinous of crimes, yet his public response, or lack thereof, is a deafening quiet. In most cases, an individual accused of such crimes would be vehemently proclaiming their innocence, making desperate pleas to the court of public opinion. There would be a discernible sense of urgency, a palpable need to clear their name. Yet Bryan Kohberger remains oddly silent. This absence of public rage, this lack of desperate pleas for innocence, is a deviation from the norm that we might expect in a situation as grave as this. Let's take a moment to consider the usual suspects in such scenarios. The impassioned speeches, the tearful pleas, the cries of injustice. All these are typical reactions of defendants faced with similar accusations, yet none are present in Kohberger's case. It begs the question, why is this defendant so quiet? Is it a sign of guilt, a manifestation of shock, or a strategic move on his part? Perhaps this silence is Bryan's shield, a protective measure against the onslaught of public opinion, or maybe it's his sword, a calculated move intended to cast doubt and uncertainty. Regardless of the motive behind the silence, it's a chilling aspect of this case that adds yet another layer of complexity and intrigue. As we wrap up this segment, we're left with a lingering question. If you were in Bryan's shoes, wouldn't you plead your innocence? Wouldn't you be filled with rage at the accusations, at the world's rush to judgment, at the potential loss of your freedom? Finally, we look at the parents' reactions. Parents, both of the victims and the defendant, surprisingly muted. Where is their rage? This is a question we can't help but ask as we delve deeper into the eerie silence surrounding the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murders. The parents, who are usually the most vocal, the most fervent in their demands for justice or their cries of innocence for their accused offspring, have been eerily quiet. In previous cases, similar to this one, we've seen parents on either side of the tragedy step up to the podium of public opinion. They've expressed their grief, their anger, their disbelief. They've pleaded for justice, for mercy, for understanding. They've been the voice of their children, the victims who can no longer speak, and the defendants who are unable to plead their own case. Yet in this case, we hear nothing. No pleas of innocence from the parents of Bryan Kohberger, no demands for justice from the parents of the victims, with the exception of Steve's emotional interviews and Stacy Chapin's book promotions. Their silence is as perplexing as it is deafening. Is it possible that they too, like the pastor, the police, and the defendant, are caught in the throes of shock and disbelief? Or is it a calculated decision to remain silent, to let the legal process take its course without the noise of public opinion clouding the waters? Yet, their silence raises more questions than it answers. It leaves a void that is filled with speculation, conjecture, and suspicion. It feeds the mystery that surrounds this case, adding another layer to an already complex puzzle. To conclude, the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder case is unusually quiet. Where is the rage? In conclusion, the absence of rage in this case is striking. We've navigated through the eerie silence of a religious leader, Doug Wilson, whose opportunity to display community support and clear his name was notably missed. We've dissected the unusually calm demeanor of the Moscow Police Department, whose press conferences lacked the expected urgency and indignation that usually accompany such gruesome crimes. We've questioned the quiet of Bryan Kohberger, the defendant, whose lack of public plea for his innocence raises questions. We've also touched upon the muted responses from the parents of both the victims and the defendant, an area where rage would typically be palpable. It's a bizarre scenario where the emotion that should be at the forefront is conspicuous by its absence. This lack of rage, this absence of public outcry, seems to hang over the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder case like an uncomfortable silence. Why does the Moscow, Idaho quadruple murder case lack the typical outrage? That is a question we are left pondering.